You know, that quote from Professor Narayan Punt? Man, it has stuck with me for years. And right now, it feels more on the money than ever. Because as we all race to build these incredibly smart machines, we might just be ignoring the single weakest link in the whole system.
Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a really fascinating, kind of provocative idea that the biggest risk in this new AI era isn't the AI at all. It's us. It's our own natural stupidity. We're going to break down how our own thinking habits can go sideways and, way more importantly, what we can actually do about it.
All right, so here's the plan. First, we're going to flip the script and talk about why the real problem isn't the AI. Then, we'll get to know the 4 big mental traps we all fall into, the so-called faces of natural stupidity. After that, we'll see how AI can put those little mistakes on steroids, creating massive risks. And we'll wrap it all up with a practical plan, a sort of cognitive workout to keep your own thinking sharp.
Okay, let's get right to the heart of it. When you look at the big screw-ups happening in the world of AI, they're not coming from some evil, rogue machine. Nope. They're coming from perfectly fine algorithms that are just following lazy, biased, or just plain overconfident human instructions.
The source material for this explainer calls this cognitive entropy. And honestly, the analogy is perfect. Just think about your brain like a room in your house. It takes work to keep it clean and organized, right? The second you stop putting in that effort, it just naturally gets messy. Well, our critical thinking works the exact same way. If we stop using it, our judgment just kind of falls apart.
And this is not just some clever metaphor. Research from places like MIT has actually confirmed that when we start outsourcing all our thinking to AI, the reasoning centers in our brain literally become less active. It really boils down to a simple, almost brutal truth. The less we think, the worse we get at thinking. It's skill decay, plain and simple.
So, if we're all at risk of getting worse at thinking, what does that actually look like day to day? What are these sneaky mental habits that are tripping us up when we use these new tools?
Let's make this real. Natural stupidity isn't about being dumb or having a low IQ. Not at all. It's about how our judgment gets eroded by a few really common mental shortcuts. Let's look at the big 4.
First up is a classic, confirmation bias. We all do this, right? We look for evidence that proves we're right. Now here's the danger. Large language models are absolute masters at this. You can ask an AI to validate your idea, and boom, it will spit out a beautiful, persuasive report that does exactly that. It's like having a high-speed echo chamber for your own ideas. Just look at this real-world example. A supply chain manager asks an AI to validate his brand new strategy. The AI does exactly what he asked. It gives him a whole report filled with awesome efficiency stats. But it left out all the massive risks of disruption. Why? Well, because the manager never thought to ask it to look for the flaws. It was a simple little oversight that turned into a very painful and very expensive lesson.
Okay, the second one is cognitive offloading. This is what happens when we basically just hand over the keys. We let the machine do all the thinking, make the decision, and we just go, yep, sounds good. This is the direct cause of that skill decay we were just talking about. Our own reasoning muscles literally start to atrophy because we're not using them anymore.
And this is where things get seriously scary. A global HR team used AI to automate their candidate shortlisting. For months it was amazing. So seamless, in fact, that they totally stopped questioning its choices. Then, they got sued for bias. And the worst part? When they were asked to explain how the AI made its decisions, nobody on the team could. They hadn't just offloaded the work, they'd offloaded their judgment and, ultimately, their responsibility.
Number 3 is just good old-fashioned effort avoidance. Look, our brains are wired to be efficient, and let's be honest, that often just means being lazy. AI gives us a pretty plausible, well-written answer on the very first try, and that temptation to just say, good enough, and move on is so strong, even when it means we might miss something really important.
Think about a marketing lead who needed a campaign idea, and fast. The AI-generated one that seemed okay, it felt good enough. So they went with it. They launched it. The problem? That good enough idea had a huge cultural blind spot that ended up causing a total PR nightmare.
The path of least resistance led them straight off a cliff.
And the last one is something called overfitting the context. Now, that's a bit of a fancy term, but it really just means a copy-paste error in our thinking. It's when we take a solution that worked perfectly in one situation and just assume it's going to work just as well somewhere totally different, without thinking about the local realities.
For example, a European fintech used AI to generate its compliance rules for Europe. It worked great. Then, when they decided to launch in Kenya, they just copied and pasted them. They completely missed how dominant mobile money is there and how different the regulations are. It ended up creating a ton of friction with their new customers and even the local government.
Okay, so we've seen these 4 habits: confirmation bias, offloading, laziness. They can each feel like a small individual mistake, but they're not. So how does one person's mental shortcut snowball into a massive system-wide problem?
Well, the answer is what's called the AI-human risk loop. This is the point where AI stops being a simple tool and turns into an amplifier. It becomes a turbocharger for our own flawed thinking. And here's how that loop works. Step 1, one of us makes a bad call because of one of those mental traps. Step 2, the AI takes that flawed decision and scales it up instantly, faster, louder, and across way more places than any human team ever could. And step 3, that bad decision gets hard-coded into the company's automated systems before anyone even realizes what happened. The result? You get human error at an inhuman scale.
All right, I know, this all sounds pretty bad. We've seen the problem, we've seen how it can escalate with terrifying speed. So now for the most important question of all. How do we break this loop? How do we make sure we stay sharper than our tools?
So the answer isn't to just stop using AI. The answer is to start a kind of deliberate mental workout program. The author calls it a cognitive fitness plan, and it's all built around 5 simple exercises, or nudges, to keep our judgment in top shape.
Think of this fitness plan as a toolkit for staying mentally in the game. The whole idea is to intentionally add a little friction back into the process. Instead of just taking the AI's first answer, we build new habits, like the friction pause, where you just stop and ask, what would have to be true for this answer to be totally wrong? Or my personal favorite, reverse prompting, where you actually tell the AI to argue against its own recommendation. The goal of all 5 of these drills is exactly the same: force us to slow down, to stay engaged, and to make sure we stay the pilot of the plane, not just a passenger along for the ride.
So this fitness plan is incredibly powerful. It can absolutely help us fight that cognitive entropy and break that dangerous risk loop. But there's one last twist. Sharpening our thinking is really only step 1. Because even when we learn to think with perfect crystal clarity, that doesn't automatically guarantee that we'll choose rightly.
And that leads us to the final, and maybe the most important question of all. These tools, they can find an optimal answer, they can find a data-driven answer, but what they can never, ever do is tell us what the right answer is. An AI can process information, but it can't process morality. It can't carry that weight of responsibility. That still rests entirely with us.